Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 5 of the Figure Feedback Podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about being safe when you're resin 3D printing. Because Christmas just left us, and I'm pretty sure there's a decent amount of people who received a cool resin 3D printer underneath the Christmas tree. You're probably dying to get started and print out some really awesome models that you find online. And I don't know if this is related or not, but I went to a couple different Walmarts right after Christmas, and there is a suspiciously low amount of 91% IPA on the store shelves. Now, I don't know if that's directly the cause of people getting resin 3D printers, but I did think that it was pretty interesting seeing as how the 70% IPA was fully stocked, but the 91% wasn't there. Seemed really strange to me. So it might not have anything to do with resin 3D printers, but just in my mind, I was thinking, I wonder if that's because people got printers for Christmas. But whether or not it's related, I still think that being safe is key. Now, what kind of inspired this is every time I go on the Resin 3D printing subreddit, I'm always seeing pictures of someone when they're asking a question about something that's going on with their printer or their prints, or they're showing off something that they just printed. They, a lot of them, are holding the build plate barehanded, upside down, or they have a model in their hand with no gloves and it's clear that it hasn't been cured yet. And, they're just asking a normal question or making a normal comment as if everything is just peachy and fine. And I think that that's not cool. Now, granted, there are a lot of people on Reddit, they say, hey, first of all, wear gloves. But I also think that they're kind of getting a little bit tired of saying it because sometimes it feels like the more you say it, the more deaf ears it tends to fall on. But I do want this hobby to be something that is picked up and goes as mainstream as it possibly can. And key to making that happen is making everyone aware of the safety precautions that you need to take when you're resin 3D printing. So the first thing that I'm going to mention are the gloves. You need to be wearing gloves when you do this because resin is toxic. Okay, it's not meant to be on human skin. It's really not meant to be on anything really because it gets all sticky and then it cures and it can just be kind of a mess, but it's especially not equipped to be on human skin. Now, if it does touches your skin, it varies from person to person, but it could cause some immediate irritation. It can cause some immediate burning and itching and cracking for some people, but then for others, nothing may happen at all. Just, oh, got some resin on me. They'll just wipe it off and everything seems to be fine. But resin is one of those things with continued unprotected exposure. You lessen your ability to fight off the bad effects. You become increasingly allergic to it. And those allergies could lead to more serious complications down the line. So that's why you really don't want this stuff to touch you at all. You want to prolong the longevity that you have when it comes to working with resin. And you need to wear gloves, but not just any gloves. The reason why you want to be wearing nitrile gloves is because they're more chemically resistant than those other types of gloves. So they're ideal for working with resin. Now, you can get nitrile gloves from almost anywhere. You can even go to the Dollar Tree and get some nitrile gloves, but I recommend that you get them in bulk when you can. See if you can get a pack of like 50 at a time or 100 gloves at a time because you're going to be using a lot of them. I think that you should use a fresh pair of nitrile gloves whenever you touch anything that is either coated with resin at that present time or has been coated with resin in the past and it just hasn't been cured, like your workstation. Okay, that's what I do. Even if I'm doing is just taking a bottle of resin and pouring it into my vat, if I know that I handled that bottle of resin with gloves that were contaminated, then I get a fresh pair of gloves. I know that it seems really wasteful, and yeah, it is wasteful, but that's just the nature of the hobby. So make sure that you use a fresh pair of gloves whenever you're going in. Now, as far as where you get them, like I said, you can get them at like the dollar store if you want. But if you want to buy them in bulk, if you have a Harbor Freight near you, then I think that's really the best place to go as far as price is concerned, because you can get a pack of 100 gloves. Currently, it's like $11 or $12, but just about a month ago, the price was $2 less. So Harbor Freight, like everybody else, raised the prices on everything, and now they're more expensive. And if you don't have a Harbor Freight near you, you can also go to Home Depot, Lowe's, maybe Ace Hardware, and just find some gloves from there. But like I said, I always do recommend that you buy a nice amount of them at one time, because when you really start going and you find yourself printing over and over and over again, you are going to run through those gloves quickly. All right. So you don't want to break up the flow. Just make sure that you've got some gloves on hand. So that's the first thing that you need. The second thing that you need is a respirator. Now, here's the thing. I'm guilty of not always wearing a respirator. And I think there's probably a lot of people who also kind of skip the whole respirator aspect of it. But it really is important to use it, especially if you find yourself to be a little bit sensitive to the fumes of IPA, if you are using IPA, and then just the resin fumes in general. Now, the jury is still kind of out on any long term effects of breathing in resin fumes, just kind of in a passive kind of a way, not holding it up to your nose and just huffing it over and over again, but just being in the same general vicinity of resin fumes and the long term effects that it can have on you. Hopefully, it's not anything worse than, smelling gasoline occasionally or something like that, or like spray paint, but we don't know. So that's why it's best just to be safe and have the respirator on hand with the appropriate cartridges that's going to do the best job of neutralizing those fumes so that you don't always breathe that stuff in. Now, in addition to that respirator, another really important thing that you should have, I think even if you choose not to use a respirator, I do think that you need to wear some protective eyewear, some goggles. Now, some people say that you need to use certain types of goggles, but I think you need something to cover your eyes in general. Now, you're probably like, well, I'm not going to be splashing in this stuff, so what do I need to protect my eyes for? I think the most dangerous part of resin 3D printing, and the reason why you would need goggles, are flying supports. The support structures that help your print adhere to the build plate and make sure that everything comes out looking nice and properly proportioned. When you're taking those supports off, there's always a chance that there's going to be a little piece of it just going to pop off and fly somewhere. It happens more frequently than you might think. It's happened to me tons of times. It's unpredictable. There's so many different supports, and it can be long supports, it can be skinny supports, fat supports, little tiny supports that like go in between the teeth of a model, like if their mouth is open, and they can just fly up. I'll give you an example. I was wearing goggles one time, taking the supports off of something, doing it bulk at a time, and then boom, one flies up, pops me right in the goggle. If I didn't have the goggles on, it probably just would hit the lens of my glasses. But if I wasn't wearing glasses, it would have went straight into my eye. You don't want that to happen, especially if it's uncured resin, because it can really cause some severe eye problems, up to including blindness. And besides, who wants anything in their eye? All right, so goggles are really important, even if they're just cheap little, my first science fair goggles. Something that's going to cover your face, cover your eyes is really important to have. Now, in addition to that, I like to wear sleeves as well. I wear sleeves because I got my gloves on, but I wear short sleeves most of the time, and then that leaves a bunch of skin exposed. So if I'm wearing gloves and I feel that I'm being safe because it covers up to like this part of my wrist, then what about the rest of my arm? It's not like things can't touch me there. So I like to wear long sleeves. And it's not any kind of like chemical resistant sleeves, just something to cover my arms. It can be just a thin jacket, or I have like these athletic sleeves, these Nike sleeves that I pull up over my arm, just something to cover that exposed skin. And then you also have to think about your feet. Things can drip. So make sure that you're wearing some socks and some shoes. And if you're not going to wear like full shoes and you're going to wear sandals or flip flops or something, that's fine. But just make sure that you're wearing some socks because you'll be surprised. Resin can just drip on you. There might be some resin somewhere that you don't even realize is there until it drips. Or it might you might have like a little mishap with some IPA that's contaminated and something might spill. So, just make sure that your feet are going to be protected as well. So, that's pretty much it as far as your personal protective equipment goes. But just as important as that is you need to also make sure that you are set up in a place that is safe for you to work. Ideally, is going to be a place that is separate from where you congregate, separate from where you spend most of your time. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges with resin 3D printing, especially for people who live in smaller places like smaller apartments, or maybe you just have a room that you can work in, you live with other people, you don't have a shed, you don't have a garage or something like that. And if that's your situation, then for safety's concern, it's probably best that you don't do resin 3D printing because things get contaminated really quickly with this stuff. And you don't want to be printing somewhere where you sleep. You don't want it to be even in a room like this. You don't want it to be in a closet because it emits fumes. And unless you have a really good way of ventilating the fumes from your room to the outside, then it's kind of risky to just be breathing this stuff in all the time. I'll go back to the gasoline analogy. Just imagine you have like an open can of gasoline just sitting there in your room and you can just smell those fumes. And it maybe it don't bother you too much, but it's not something that you want to continuously keep breathing in. And that's just for the fumes. You also have to take into consideration cross contamination because you have to think about the worst case scenario. People say that resin 3D printing is really messy, and I've always said that sure, it can be messy, but at the same time, if you have your procedure set up properly and your workflow set up properly, then you can minimize the amount of mess that you actually have to deal with. I don't think that there's any need for multiple big, like aluminum trays, roll after roll of paper towels, newspapers bundled up and just crumpled everywhere. I don't think it needs to be like that. Simple, nice size silicone mats that resist the resin, that the resin can't really stick to and seep into, something that you can wipe down easily, and just knowing what your procedures are going to be from your dirty wash to your support removal to your clean wash to your drying and then to your curing. Once you kind of get that all done and you understand your workflow, it drastically minimizes the amount of mess that you have because you're not running around going, oh, I need this, oh, I need that, where did I put this, where did I put that, oh, let me grab these paper towels, and you're grabbing way too many that you actually need. It's all about organization and procedures. Now, when it does come to paper towels, though, I do recommend that you get shop towels and not your regular, white, regular kitchen paper towels because shop towels are more absorbent and you can use them for longer. So when you use one strip of that paper towel, it doesn't automatically have to be thrown away. You can leave it out and then it's going to dry and then it'll be good to wipe up the next bit of mess that you might have. I've been on the same two rolls of paper towels for months and months and months because they can last a long time if you use them properly. Now, just going back to the area that you need to be in, ideally is going to be a place away from where you congregate, separate from where you sleep, separate from where you eat. I use a garage, and I'm fortunate enough to have a garage that is open enough and it's not crowded and it's away from the house, so I don't have to worry about, cross contamination going into the house. And I also don't have to worry about anyone kind of getting into it. Kids don't play in the garage. I don't hang out in the garage and eat and drink and stuff like that. And plus, the area is off in its own little corner. And everything in that corner is dedicated to resin 3D printing. The only things that ever come in contact with that area are the things that I am never going to use for anything else ever again. If it hits that resin 3D printing table, it's going to stay on that resin 3D printing table. And that's why having that kind of separation and isolation is extremely important. You can think of it like food, working in the kitchen or maybe even your own kitchen. You got raw meat, raw chicken. You're handling it with your hands. You're not, or at least you shouldn't, handle that chicken and then go around and start touching your doorknobs, your light switches, your remote controls, your microwave, your refrigerator, stuff that's in the refrigerator. You don't do that because you can be spreading harmful bacteria that you can't see. But if you happen to ingest that harmful bacteria, it can make you really sick. So cross contamination is something that you really need to be wary of. And that's exactly why your resin 3D printing station needs to be set up in a place where nothing else around it matters. You just have a dedicated area in which you can work. Now, another reason why it needs to be a dedicated area away from stuff that you would normally interact with is because sometimes things don't work out the way that you might expect it to. You need to prepare for the worst case scenario. I'll give you an example. Most of the time when I do a print and I'm trying to get it off the build plate and I got that little metal scraper, I can usually get under there, pop off the print, and it comes out clean. But there's been situations in the past where the first layers on that build plate were extremely brittle. This was with water washable resin, transparent water washable resin, and it would not come off clean. And I needed to scrape that stuff off the build plate, and those little pieces of resin were just flying off like shards of glass. And it was just so messy on my table. My table had never been that messy before with random bits of resin everywhere. I'm scraping this stuff and I'm just hearing pieces fly and they hit the wall. They're hitting the floor. They're going all on the table. And that could be a horrible situation if you're doing this in your bedroom or in your dining area or just someplace where you're going to be walking and eating and everything because like where does this stuff even go? It could be anywhere. But fortunately, for my garage, it's okay if this stuff gets on the floor and hits the wall and all that other stuff because, well, no one's going to be hanging out in here anyway. So it makes it a lot more tolerable. But the whole point is, I wasn't expecting that to happen, but it did happen. And because it was in its own little spot, then I can keep it contained to that spot and I won't carry it with me. Another example is when I was working with water washable resin and I had my big container of water with the lid on it. And then I put it on the table. I took the lid off and then I didn't realize that there was a decent amount of water on the underside of that lid. So then the water just starts coming off the lid and it spills on the table. And now I'm like, oh man, it's going back towards the printer. I got to grab the paper towel. I have to dab that water up. And then the water is starting to sort of come off the table. It's got a plastic tablecloth on it. Now it's starting to go drip down from the tablecloth. And now it's getting a little bit on the floor. And just imagine if that happens, all that contaminated liquid right there in your house, in your room. You don't want that to happen. Okay, and I'm not trying to scare you about resin 3D printing. I don't think resin is something that you should be afraid of, but I do think that it's something that you need to respect because it can be harmful to you and you want to minimize that risk as much as possible. So if you can, put it somewhere where if a mishap happens, that mishap can be contained and it cannot be taken into other areas of your living space and potentially contaminating everything in its path. Because resin has a tendency, once it gets on something, it's hard to get it off, especially after it cures. And that brings me to curing. Curing your prints is the last step that you need to do in order for you to start handling the prints safely. Even if they've been washed and even if they've been dried, make sure that they're cured first before you actually start handling it with your bare hands. Now, to me, the easiest way, my preferred way, is a wash and cure station that already has the appropriate UV lights installed. It's got a spinning turning table, and I just put my models in there. I set a timer, and then it spins and everything is cured, and then everything is fine. But those curing stations can cost at least $100 a pop, and that's what makes this hobby a little bit more on the expensive side, at least when you're trying to get all the equipment to get started. And I know that some people they make their own curing stations. They get the appropriate UV lights and then they make a box and they put foil all around it. And that's fine too. So if you want to do that to save yourself some money, then go ahead. That's fine. How do you actually know if your figures are cured? It's you kind of have to go by feel. Now, first, if it's sticky, then no, it's probably not cured. But the cured models are going to have a kind of a firmness to them, a hardness to them, sort of almost like hard plastic, but not quite the feel of plastic. It'll feel done. When something is not cured, it can still be kind of pliable, a little bit bendy, still feel like a little bit tacky. But when it's actually cured, it's going to be more solid. It's kind of hard to describe, but once you actually have something that's cured and you know that it's cured, it feels like something that will shatter or at least break if you were to drop it on the ground. That's how you know when it's actually ready. And when you have a wash and cure station and you're curing something, it kind of depends on the size of the model, but if you're printing miniatures, about 3 minutes or so will be good enough for a miniature. If you want to bump it up to like 5 minutes or something like that to be on the safe side, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. People say that you can over cure it and hurt the model. It's, in my experience, is negligible. So, just kind of be more safe than sorry when it comes to that. But if you can spring for an actual like wash and cure station, that's what I would suggest that you do, simply because it's just more assuring and it's easier and there's less DIY involved in it. And hopefully you got enough space on your workstation to put that so that you can just keep it there all the time, keep it plugged in, go back to it whenever you need to, and you'll be good. And last but certainly not least is disposal of contaminated materials. We went through all this stuff about keeping ourselves safe, but now we got to start thinking about keeping other people safe. Because resin is really, 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 really bad for the environment. And it's not a secret. They'll tell you themselves on the safety spec sheet for the resin. It's extremely harmful to the environment. And we have to do our best to make sure that we take care of the environment as much as possible. And one of the things that I really do like about the Resin 3D printing community is that there is already an understanding of how important it is to protect the environment from this. And it shows a level of responsibility that I think is just really, really awesome. So, in order to protect our environment from resin, you got to make sure that we handle the contaminated materials properly. So that means that anything that you have contaminated with resin, if it's going to be your gloves, if it's going to be supports that you've taken off, before you throw them in the garbage can and send it off to the landfill, do your best to cure those things. Putting your gloves like in the washing in the curing station when you're done, or taking all of your materials and letting it sit out in the sun for a few days, maybe even a week, as long as you possibly can, just so that they can be cooked by the sun and the UV rays can get to them and everything. And once those things become cured, then you can put them in the trash bag and throw them away that way. And then when it comes to your liquid, your IPA that has been well used, well worn, you have to dispose of that properly too. Now, I wish that every place in the United States just simply allowed you to take that contaminated liquid and put it in a big bucket, take it to a disposal facility, leave it out for someone to grab it. They don't charge you a dime, and then you go on about your business. But that's not the case here. And that's especially not the case in the state that I live, which is Georgia, where they actually tell you on one of the government websites that it's unfortunate that we don't have many cost effective ways for citizens to dispose of hazardous waste themselves. And they literally just say, do your best. It's kind of sad, but that's the way that it is. So we're going to do our best. We're going to take that IPA contaminated or that resin contaminated IPA or resin contaminated water. And what I do, since those containers are too big to put in the wash and cure station, I take them outside in my backyard. I let them sit out in the sun for days and days and days. How many days? Just kind of depends. What you want to do is you want to leave it out there long enough so that that resin that's been contaminated can cure, it'll solidify, it'll become kind of gelatinous. And once it kind of becomes that solid waste, then you'll be able to put in the garbage can and have it taken out. But until that happens, it's still considered extremely hazardous. It can take a while for it to, really get cured and get ready to go. It's going to depend on the intensity of the light where you are and how long it's been there, but it's one of the responsibilities that you're going to have to undertake when it comes to safely disposing of this stuff as safely as you can. Now, I'm sure that you're not going to have every single square inch of everything completely cured. There might still be some uncured something somewhere that you throw away. It's impossible to know for sure. But the important thing is to do your due diligence and do your best to make sure that these things are properly cured before you add them to the landfill. And whatever you do, don't just pour it out into your lawn, before it's cured. Water washable resin doesn't mean wash it down the sink. It just means that you can wash it with water. But the water still needs to be taken care of, just like if it was IPA. It's still is considered hazardous material. So don't wash your prints in a sink. I saw a video of someone reviewing something, they were washing a print in the sink. Like, do not do that. It's extremely harmful to marine life. You don't want to do that, okay? So I know it can be tedious, but it's part of the responsibility of resin 3D printing. And unless we want some government entities to really start regulating this stuff and making it extremely serious, and then everyone gets all upset because now the government's in my business, then be responsible and let's regulate ourselves to the best of our ability to make sure that we can minimize the hazards that we're putting out there into the world. So that is pretty much it. My safety tips for resin 3D printing for new folks getting into the hobby. I know it sounds like a lot, and I know it might sound like I'm preaching a little bit. Maybe I am, but this is still really, really important stuff, and I do want you to be safe, and I do want us to be able to continue to print our models with as little interference as possible. And, once you get the methods and the procedures down and you kind of just become accustomed to the way that this hobby operates, you are going to be so happy with the amount of models that you print, the different types of resins that you can use, the different applications that you can use it for. And if you are someone who likes to paint and likes to customize things, oh my God, you are going to have so much stuff you will not be able to paint it all. You will build your own little pile of shame or pile of opportunity when it comes to painting things, and you will really just be like, wow, I am never going to be bored if I love to paint, because there's so many different models coming out from so many awesome creators that you can support, either from paid subscriptions or stuff that you find for free. There's always going to be something new waiting for you around the corner. So thank you all so much for taking the time to watch and or listen to this podcast. And I'll be back soon with another episode. So until then, if I don't see you before 2024, Happy New Year. And let's try to make it a good one. All right. Take care of yourselves. I'll speak to you soon.